This summer, an exciting series of podcasts will feature testimonials by Windelo owners, skippers, and sailors who share their stories. Today, Jean-Marie Poujate, a professional skipper, welcomes us aboard a Windelo 54 Sport. He's just back from 2 transatlantic crossings and a season in the Caribbean. Jean-Marie, can you tell us a little about yourself?
I was born in Concarneau in Finistère, Brittany, facing Les Glénats. It's a famous place for sailing, with Port La Forêt and all the racing boats right beside it. I started sailing at a very young age because in kindergarten we were already sailing. It was a kind of a must. My parents had boats before I was born, so I have photos of me in the cradle in the bottom of the boat. When I was 14, I became a sailing instructor, and at 15, my parents gave me keys to the boat. I used to take the boat out with my friends, and when my parents didn't need it. I've been self-reliant on a boat for a long time now, and then I moved on to something completely different. I completed my studies and returned to boating, but on the manufacturing side. I worked for Beneteau and Marceau d'Or Composite, which also made Catanars at the same time. So I went back to school to take and pass my Capitaine 200 in sailing. As soon as I had it, I bought a sailboat and set off for the Caribbean. I did a bit of everything. I did chartering, I also did a lot of day trips, motorboating, speedboating, fast boats, so completely different. Pre-COVID, I worked for Dream Yacht Charter, and I did all their boat repatriations and all their boat deliveries. The area I worked was Puerto Rico in the north and Grenada to the south.
Can you tell us a little about this Atlantic crossing on a Windelo? I mean, how would you compare it to another boat?
What's impressive is the speed. You sail at an average of 8 knots on a standard cruising yacht. When you're doing 8 knots on this boat, it feels like you're standing still. In 2001, I brought back Catherine Chabot's Whirlpool with her team, but then we were already amazed at doing 12 knots in a 15-knot wind. It feels like I'm sailing a luxury cruiser at the speed we had 20 years ago on racing yachts. That's pretty awesome. We had some great averages. We succeeded in exceeding 250 nautical miles in one day, and the return trip with a direct course from Guadeloupe to the Azores was paradoxical for me. So virtually as the crow flies after 48 hours, which is really unusual. This meant that it took us just over 13 days to get to the Azores and 14 days to leave. It took me less time to sail from Guadeloupe to the Azores than it did to sail from Cape Verde to Guadeloupe. And the distance is roughly the same, except that in one direction you're supposed to be upwind and downwind in another. It was a great performance all the same, because if you adjust the little trim on this boat, if you're not too downwind on the beam, you can increase the angle, and with 10 knots wind speed, you can average 10 knots. And that's quite exceptional on a cruising yacht.
How did your life on board go during your crossing? There were 2 of you on board. Tell us more about that.
For me, it was simple. Originally, I was ready to do a transatlantic crossing on my own, but for safety and insurance reasons, you can't. So I took a friend with me, a bit of a sailor, but mostly a cook. I handled the boat on my own, and I ate well because there was a cook on board. So, in a way, I sailed the transatlantic alone, but with someone, so as not to feel alone. And that's good too. If there are problems, he can help, and there's no housekeeping on top of managing the boat. And that balance really was ideal. I could try a transatlantic crossing racing on my own, because I kept going, hence the performance, with someone doing what I didn't have time to do. So it was great.
And how about the living space aboard during this long crossing?
When there are 2 of you, you each have a hull. So you've got a shower, your own toilet, and 2 bedrooms each. Life is really relaxed, and the boat is incredibly well equipped.
What about the forward cockpit?
I love it. There's nothing better for sailing. You don't have to be outside, you're not exposed to the elements, and you can enjoy life on board. If anything happens from the cockpit, you can see everything. It feels like a racing boat. You can manage the boat by yourself, even racing. Use several sails, and the electric winches are really wonderful. I'll never go back to a catamaran with a flybridge, or even a TS with an outdoor helm stations. That's good for a 24-hour racing session, but no more. When you spend 25 days at sea, you really value not getting wet, not being in the wind, and not having to stay outside. because otherwise with a crew, it's punishing to be the person at the helm, staying close to the sheets and so on. Here, everything's close at hand, which is great. You also have a view that you don't have on other catamarans. You're still behind a big windshield with a panoramic view, and that's great. You really nailed it on that score. It's really excellent.
So, what were the conditions during your crossing?
The return trip was fine, but the outgoing trip was tough, because when we left Gibraltar, we initially wanted to go to Madeira. After that, the weather got complicated. We had to reroute to the Canaries, and were forced to look for a weather front to the southwest of Portugal, where we hit a steady 40-knot wind for 4 hours. We took 1 hour with a steady 50-knot wind, and 5-meter troughs upwind, so the boat is strong. I've tested it and it's good. You have my approval. So it was quite hard going. After that, we had some strong trade winds. We were between 25 and 30 knots all the time. With a full Genica and 2 reefs in the mainsail, the boat was making good headway.
And the trip back?
The return trip was very good indeed. We had very little headwind over 10 or 15 knots, which is how things work best for me, like on a lot of boats. We frequently sailed 220 nautical miles a day, sometimes 250. That's quite exceptional on a cruising yacht. Exceeding 200 miles a day means that it's a good boat. On the way back, just 2 days from the Azores, we overtook a Route du Rhum class 40 on the way back from Martinique. There were 4 racers on board, and we were gaining an average of 1.5 knots on them. They were really racing, with a router and everything. We didn't have a router, we just had windy, and I went feeling for clouds, etc. So I'm delighted that we outran a boat of the Route du Rhum, but of course, it was a monohull.
It was your first time sailing a boat with electric motors. How did you feel about that? What was the difference?
It's the total opposite of your typical boat. With an electrical problem on a typical boat, you start the engines. Here it's the opposite. So this is a bit of a paradox, because it's the reflex we've always had. But it's nice, because you don't have all those noises or smells. I like it.
What about power and use?
The good thing is that it has a lot of torque when it starts up, but the aim of a sport boat is not to use the engines, especially when you've got a boat that can make good headway in light winds, since you're still doing 80–90% of the wind speed. It also encourages you not to use engines.
If we say an anchorage in the West Indies?
The boat was always at anchor. I don't put it in the marinas. It's the tropics. There's no point.
When you have 6 to 8 people, how is life organized aboard? What do people think about the space and the boat?
They love it. One thing I like is that you've chosen to have 1 bathroom per hull, rather than 4 bedrooms with 4 bathrooms. For us, there's less housekeeping to do. When you're here, you feel like you're in a villa. The cabins with their windows are wonderful. You're in bed, you wake up in the tropics with turquoise-colored water, you open the curtain, it outstrips all the villas in the world. What's more, you move every day, and the people love the equipment on board. Dishwasher, washing machine if they need it, oven, induction hob and all that. It's wonderful for them. They don't feel like they're sailing like we used to. It was more like camping, even on 50-foot boats.
And the outdoor terrace?
People like it. It creates a flush deck, so kids jump from it. The roof is good too. Kids climb onto a flat roof like that. They love it. One bonus is that the boat has a shallow draft. You can take it to places no one goes, because a draft of 1.1 meter for a 16-meter boat is quite exceptional. It's more like the draft of a 40-foot catamaran. That's less than the Lagoon 380. Its draft is 1.2 meters.
Moving on to a slightly different topic, you arrived at the boatyard 2 days ago. How did you find the services?
Good. I made the arrangements with Pierre and Stéphane. As soon as I got there was already a place. We had already planned everything, and the team was responsive. Nearly everything is done. Great. A good impression. Keep up the good work. It's a pleasure to work with professionals happy to help.
Any encounters?
I have quite a few videos. As soon as we left the Azores, we had dolphins every day, which was pretty amazing. I filmed them. We were at 11 knots, and there are 2 dolphins in our wake. We definitely saw a lot of dolphins.
And the journey back to the Mediterranean via Gibraltar?
We ran by Gibraltar at an average of 12 knots in the middle of cargo ships to avoid killer whales and problems with cargo ships. and cargo vessels are limited to 12 knots. So at 12.5 knots, we were faster than the cargo vessels. I'm not used to as a sailor, so that was fabulous too. In the Med, sailing was great. We were alone with dolphins and it was really sunny, really nice. I was really happy with my transatlantic.
Thank you, Jean-Marie, for sharing your experience. I hope you liked this first podcast. We will be bringing you more sailing stories from all over the world, and Windelo owners will be sharing their experiences.
This is a short video after 19 days at sea. So here we are in Gibraltar, which is pretty good. Guadeloupe to Gibraltar in 19 days. We're surrounded by cargo ships everywhere we look. There's a big one behind us, which we're overtaking. There's a ferry just behind us. The ferry that goes from Tangier to the European side. And Tangier is just behind the sail there. And it's windy. The boat is making 12 knots. We're going faster than the cargo vessels, which is kind of fun. When people say that cargo ships pollute, that's the cargo ship's exhaust fumes we've had since Gibraltar as we cruise alongside. A short video to show you the dolphins that came with us as we left the Azores.